I have been constantly engaged, studying, documenting, photographing, writing, presenting talks about this thing. And what has happened is that because one is involved in a place for such a long time, one realizes that one has a story or one has a narrative or one has an understanding that is much larger than what you get as a snapshot. So if one today generally we ask somebody, what are the Andaman and Nicobar Islands about, or what is Kerala about, or what is Bombay about, we typically get one set of answers. So if you talk about the Andamans or the Andaman and Nicobar, of course there will be tourism, there will be Jaravas. You might have heard, some of us might have heard about the tsunami. Uh, there would be the cellular jail. But beyond that, there is very little that we know about that place. So, and like Biju mentioned, I will tell you a story of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands from my eyes. So, in some senses, it's a very unique story because it is my story, and I can very, very strongly argue that you, if you were to tell a story of the place, it would be a very different story. And I think it is important because I think in today's context, certainly in India and around the world, that when one story, one narrative is sought to be thrust upon all of us, or a set of narratives are set to be thrust, it becomes important to argue that there are different kinds of stories. So, the story I will tell you of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, you will find many things that you probably didn't know about. There will be many gaps for me, which are very obvious, and there might be so many things that you will be surprised if you were to hear anybody speak about a place he or she knows, that there are many new things. Why I'm giving all this background is because it's very important for the kind of idea that I want to put across. Of course, I want to put across an idea of a story of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. But if you have seen the announcement that was sent out, I'm also talking of a idea of a multidimensional vulnerability or a place being located at what I'm calling the tri-junction of fragility and vulnerability. And this is the story of this, and I'll tell you what I mean. But I also want to suggest that this is possibly a framework that we can try and use to understand most landscapes, ecosystems, uh, geographies that we are part of, both political, ecological, social geographies. So when I say tri-junction, what I mean, and this is something I've been for the last 2 or 3 years trying to articulate to see if it makes larger sense to understand a place like the Andaman and Nicobar, but perhaps other places that we are part of. And I think it strikes me that any ecosystem, whether it's the Western Ghats or river systems or the Himalayas or the deserts, could perhaps be understood from this kind of framework. Now, but the empirical evidence that I have to tell you the story is the story of the Andaman and Nicobar because that's the one I know the best. You might know different landscapes that you work in. So the three pictures on the right are representative of the three axes. So when I say a tri-junction, it's like three roads coming together. And what I want to propose, the three axes or the three roads are in a chronological order: the geological, the ecological, and the socio-cultural. So this is still a framework. This is a concept. So just bear with me for a moment, and then we will see if it works. So there is one way to look at it, which is to say, in the history of the planet, we have a geological dimension that comes first. This brick and mortar of the planet, probably much before life came. We have this ball of fire that becomes the earth, and there are certain topography, certain geography, soil and bricks, stone and rock and rivers and the gradients and something of that kind. So which is the base? Think of it like a building where only the framework is ready. We have the columns, we have the roof, we have nothing else in that. So that's really the brick and mortar, the basic foundation of the home that we live in. Many million years later, through processes that we don't know, life comes to be, and you will see that we have different ecologies that are very deeply dependent on the geologies of the places that we are talking about. So desert lands where there is water, soil, etc., creates the ecologies that make the different ecologies of the planet. So the coastline, the Himalayas, the Western Ghats, the deserts, the semi-arid areas, whatever. And based on this geology and ecology are how socio-cultural systems develop. So the food that we eat, the clothes that we wear, the kind of houses that we make, the materials that we use for house construction, the languages that we end up speaking, even just 2 generations back. So my family comes from Rajasthan. I grew up entirely in Pune. But even today, there's such a deep imprint of the culture of Rajasthan because that is how people over there lived, the way they made their houses. So, and we have a very fascinating context in India because we have so many different ecologies. So we have this, geology at the base on which ecology and then on which the socio-cultural systems come to be. But there is another way that we can also look at this trijunction, which is this tripod kind of thing standing in front of us. So the three legs, so if we don't look at a temporal kind of dimension, we say, okay, these are the three dimensions that are important for our lives today. The geology, the ecology, and the socio-cultural, they all need to be in balance. Otherwise, this tripod, just knock this tripod a little bit by an inch, and the whole system will collapse. So there's a very critical balance that is actually there. And the geological is very important because I feel in the last 25, 30 years of my own work, we have spoken about the ecological and the environmental crisis, but we have actually pretty much ignored the geological dimension of the whole thing. So if you look at, some of you probably are aware of the concept of the Anthropocene, and also a lot of the environmental and ecological disasters that we have been experiencing are outcomes of geological interventions. So in Wayanad there are these massive floods and landslides is because there is a lot of earth cutting that has happened. So a stable ecosystem, the Himalayas, which are extremely fragile, the youngest mountain range, if you're going to blast it, if you're going to cut it, if you're going to dam it, if you're going to make a hole through it, you are disturbing the geological dimension, which is going to have a very serious impact on the ecology and then of course the human context. So this is the framework that I want to kind of propose to you. The submission would be, we need to pay a lot more attention to the geological dimension, because when we dam a river, we are making a geological intervention. So I don't know if you're aware, but in the discussion on the Anthropocene, one of the biggest, what is the second most used material on the planet today? After water, first is water, the second is concrete. The chicken that we eat today, I'm vegetarian, so I don't know how the chicken tastes, but the chicken that we are using today is a marker of the change in the geological era of the Anthropocene. Because what is being said is that many thousands of years later, when geologists will dig up the planet and they will find they'll find a moment where there is a shift from the Holocene to the Anthropocene. One of the markers would be chicken bones. And the chicken bones that we will find today are very different from the original chicken, because it has been bred through technology to become almost a different animal. The species is the same, but the body structure we know with broiler chicken is so different. So the four markers of the Anthropocene, which are also in some senses a marker of the ecological challenges today, one is concrete, the other is plastic, the third is chicken bones, the fourth is nuclear radiation. So in the 1940s, 50s, before the 1940s, 1950s, the layers of the planet, the geological formation of the planet does not have these elements. So we can argue now that the planet has reached a new geological era because we are finding new materials in the layers of the planet. Now there is scientific discussion and disagreement, and technically we are not in the Anthropocene. So the group of scientists, what is known as stratigraphers, have said that no, we are not in the Anthropocene. So there's still discussion going on. But these are unmistakable changes that have taken place. So if you're interested, do read up work on the Anthropocene. There's a very interesting concept of the Great Acceleration in the 90s and 40s and 50s where certain changes take place. But I won't go there. But why I'm saying this is that the geological dimension is very important, and that is particularly important in a place like the Andaman and Nicobar, and I will come to that. Few years ago, I did this collection of my journalism called Islands in Flux. We have brought copies outside if anybody would like to pick up. When we were thinking of a title for the book, what struck me was looking at 20-25 years of the islands, element of constant change. Everything is changing all the time, and include geologically, socially, ecologically. And my realization and my submission was, my thought was that on the one hand, we do not understand the natural changes that are taking place independent of our existence. So geological changes, changes that are taking place in the natural cycle. The other side of the coin is that we are intervening in such significant ways that we bring about change that destabilizes systems which cause some kind of destruction and damage. And that is what I have been seeing in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and one would argue also in other parts of the country and the world. So on the right hand side, like I said, and I'll jump into the more detailed parts of the islands. On the top is a picture that represents the geological change, and I will show you. It's a fascinating story of the geology of this place, which most of us do not know about. The middle picture, of course, representing the rich tropical evergreen forest and the ecological dimension. And at the bottom right is anthropologist friend Vishwajit Pandya, who works with the tribal communities. And that, of course, is the manifestation of the socio-cultural dimension there. So we are all aware of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. They are far away from mainland India, roughly 1200 kilometers from either Chennai or Madras, which are the main getaways. It's a 2.5 hour flight from any of these places. So the islands are actually the peaks of a submerged mountain range. It's a very interesting, history, geological and other history that comes in Burma from the north, from Myanmar in the north, in this arc down into Nicobar in the south. So and you have the two groups, the Andaman in the north, which is a much larger group, and the Nicobar in the south, separated by the 10-degree channel, or where the 10-degree latitude is actually located. And ecologically, while they look as one unit, biogeographically and ecologically, they are very different entities themselves. So there is a lot of diversity even within these islands. So for example, speciation is concerned, you have species in the Andamans that are not in the Nicobar and vice versa. A very high degree of endemism, and most of you in this audience will know endemism. Of course, in an engineering college, you have to explain what endemism is. But very high levels of endemism even within the island groups and even within the sub-island groups. So it's a very interesting ecological or geological history. At the right bottom, it may not be visible to people at the back, but you see a little patch of land that is this circle here. That is the island of Sumatra in Burma, and you see a little star at the left-hand side. That's a very, very important marker of the contemporary history, and that's actually how I'm going to rotate the story. This is the epicenter of the earthquake of December 2004. We just celebrated the 20th anniversary of the tsunami, but we will all know that a tsunami is only caused when an earthquake happens. And while mainland India was very badly hit by the tsunami, I am sure parts of Kerala and Tamil Nadu were very, very badly hit. In the Andaman and Nicobar Island, the earthquake played an even important role. And it's actually, from a scientific perspective, it's very, very fascinating. Of course, it is damaging and there are concerns, but I'll come to that a little later. But I just want you to note the importance of that particular moment there. So this is a similar, you can see that star there, it is of the coast of Banda Aceh. Total area of 8,000 square kilometers, split quite disproportionately between the Andaman and Nicobar. Very large forest area, still good forest area, 7,000 square kilometers. A lot of it is very, very good. And the total population here might be only about 5 lakh people in the total island. So it's a very small population compared to say what we have in a city like Trivandrum perhaps. So it's a very small kind of, and there are very interesting things. As you can see, this is the southernmost general stores of India. So as you know, Indira Point in Great Nicobar, this place here, Indira Point, is the southernmost tip of political India. It's about 6.5 degrees north latitude, half a degree south of Kanyakumari. We are very close to that point. So it is the southernmost tip of political India. So it's only right to have the southernmost Kirana ka dukan over there. I mean, it's not my community. Typically, it would be a Marwadi or somebody putting it up, but it's actually a very interesting shop by a Sardar, by Sikh community, which is again a very interesting kind of story. But this is a picture from 2002 when I had visited there. The shop got washed away in the tsunami, but fortunately I have this picture, which is actually quite a nice picture to show that there was this. And there was also, I think there was nothing beyond this. So we actually bought some provisions, and I have memory of buying a expired dabba of Haldiram's Rasgullas. Some is still there. So I only went for a couple of days, but we bought it that day. But this is a spectacularly beautiful landscape. And I think this is perhaps the best kind of audience that will appreciate the beauty and the richness and the diversity. These are tree fern forests in Great Nicobar. These are ferns, tree that grow up to 30-35 feet. There are entire stretches of, Shanti would have some idea, she's worked there, of these large areas within the Great Nicobar Biosphere Reserve, which is that island at the extreme south. And these are tree ferns, trees that grow up to about 30 feet. And this is a picture from the bottom, it's a canopy picture. And you can make out how beautiful that forest really is. So of course there is the aesthetic and the visual beauty, but the richness and the diversity, of which I only have a little bit of a sense because I'm not a biologist, I don't know much. But from what little I've picked up from people like you, one knows that it is a very, very rich and diverse place. This is a picture, a nice cross section of a tropical rainforest in the Andaman Islands. Similarly, will be other parts, and you get a very nice cross section here, right? At low tide, you have the mangroves, then you have the littoral pandanus, the screw pine, and then going up the mountain gradient. The islands are the peak of a mountain range, so you're sitting on top of a mountain. So Port Blair, for example, the capital is like a real life roller coaster. You're going up and up and down all the time. There's no flat land over there, unlike the Lakshadweep, for example. So you see that going up the mountain gradient, these are the diptocarps, the gurjan, the white trees, and they are very good plywood species because it has the right kind of hardness that you can put on a lathe, scrape off layer by layer, and then you get plywood. Even today, some of the best plywood is made from gurjan. So, but this is a nice cross section of that particular forest. And rich within this is a Vanda terrace or Papilionanthe terrace, which is small, about 1.5 inch in width, and it's very commonly found in parts of the Andaman Islands. And when I did some reading on that, it has a very interesting ecology. It does not grow in a landscape or in a forest canopy where there is no direct sunlight. It only grows, so it won't grow in a room like this. It requires direct sunlight to actually even take birth. So you find parts of the islands where they are in very large numbers, and you can actually, it's one of those ecological indicators, if you might use them, to say that the presence of the orchid suggests that the forest canopy has been disturbed. So many years ago, I did a novel called The Last Wave. We have copies here, and this flower is there on the cover of the book, and it actually is a plot point. So in the book, I make a case that botanists are also useful. So there is this flower, and there's a botanist, by the way, called Srikumar Pillai. So there's a Kerala connection. Nothing very obvious, but just the name is that. And he is studying these forests, and he sees this flower somewhere. And he says, if this flower is there in that forest, which means the canopy has been disturbed and opened up. And he has a fight with the forest department, and forest department says, no, we have never logged over here. So he says, no, but my science tells me that you have logged, because otherwise the canopy would not be open and this flower would not be kind of present. So botanists can also be very useful in fights that we fight. But it's a very beautiful flower, but it's also an indication of a certain change in an ecosystem that is perhaps not desirable in that sense. A very high degrees of endemism. Like I mentioned, this is a Phelsuma. This is an Andaman day gecko, found only, as the name suggests, in the Andaman Islands. The little, very pretty emerald green gecko that's quite common in the Andaman Islands, not found anywhere else, in the sense of not found in the Nicobars. The closest relative is only found in Madagascar. So, but very, very commonly found in the Andaman Islands. Bird watchers would recognize this, crow pheasant. So you'd hear this call. No, that's not. It's called hoopoe here. Oh, okay. Otherwise, the hoopoe is another bird in English. Yeah. Oh, okay. So this is the crow pheasant. So this is the Andaman crow pheasant. So what we have here, perhaps is the larger, more black wings, and it's a bigger bird. So you have what are known as a subspecies endemic. So this is, you can make out, is far more maroon in color. It's smaller, but it is related to what we have over here. So eyes are red. Yes. This, of course, is one of the most charismatic species of the Nicobar Island. Sorry, that's a big error. It's only found in the Nicobar Island. It's a bird known as the Nicobari megapode. It's found on only a few of the Nicobar Islands. It's a very interesting bird for multiple reasons. Megapode means big feet. This is pretty much a flightless bird. It is found on the coastline of the Nicobar Islands, and it has very interesting nesting behavior. Unlike all birds that make nests, it will make a mound of earth. So what you see at this little brown that it is standing on is actually a little mountain of earth that the birds have scraped together on the coastline, and it is in this mound of earth that the birds lay their eggs. They don't make the conventional nest. They also don't incubate the eggs like birds do. Like reptiles, in the case of reptiles, the eggs are incubated by the heat of the decaying matter and natural heat. That's how these birds incubate their eggs. So it's probably one of those links, evolutionary links between reptiles and birds, because the nesting behavior is like reptiles, but this is actually a bird. It's one of the most unique creatures in the Andaman and the Nicobar Island. There are many like this, and it's found in only 2 or 3 of the Nicobar Islands. Again, for this set of people, of course, this is your bread and butter. This is mangrove forest. We have almost 1500 or 1900 kilometer coastline in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. You can imagine small islands, so you'll have a large area around the islands. And it's very rich, of course, under threat, but we all know the value of mangrove ecosystems. From an ecological perspective, from a fisheries perspective, from a livelihood perspective, these are breathing roots, growing against gravity. And again, of course, this is something I don't need to speak about over here. But we have very rich ecosystems on the coastline in the islands. In another audience, I could have fooled the audience by saying this: some stupid tractor driver has driven into the sea, or maybe in another era, a tractor driver has emerged from the sea. That is perhaps more like more acceptable in today's world. Ki कुछ तो एकदम suddenly किधर से तो भी निकल के आया kind of thing. You know what this is, right? This is a tractor. So this is the track of the giant leatherback. So the giant leatherback is one of the 7 species of sea turtles in the oceans of the planet. It is the largest of the sea turtles. It can grow up to 6 feet in length, can be 600 kilograms in weight. And in India, in political India, it only nests in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. From what I remember, the last recorded nesting of the giant leatherback from the mainland was from the Kerala coast in the 1950s. After that, it has not been recorded on the mainland coast. This, if I remember right, I could be wrong, but that's what my memory tells me. But they nest in very substantial numbers in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And interestingly, in local languages, even in the Andamans and in other parts of the world, it is known as the tractor kachwa. Because if you stand on the coastline, this massive track is at least as wide. You can imagine a 6-foot creature with the flippers pulling itself back and then going into the ocean. And of course, we would know, and again, this audience is the one that will know the fact that sea turtles really signify one of the most critical challenges today that we face of climate change. It's not just rising sea levels and the loss of coastal habitat, but even the breeding of the turtle. As we know, the sex of the baby that is born is dependent on the temperature at the time of hatching. And with a warmer world, and recently I was reading, there's some work from hatcheries in the Pacific, where they've actually found for many seasons, when the baby turtles are born, 90 to 95% of the baby turtles are female. So what this means, it's another route to extinction actually. You don't need to destroy habitat, but if you have only one sex that's going to be created generation after generation, because with rising temperatures in these reptile families, I think it's the skew is towards the female, the next generation being female. There will not be enough to actually procreate, and we won't have the next generation so to come. Now, and coastlines are among the most developed, most threatened kind of ecosystems for tourism, for infrastructure, road, ports, everything. So these creatures, of course, are extremely, extremely vulnerable. And there is, of course, how they go back to the ocean after hatching. We know that they follow the difference of light between the land and the sea. So the light of the stars reflected on the surface of the water is what guides creatures to go into the sea and not into the ocean. So have people here seen sea turtles? Ever? Yeah, some of you might have. So it's quite amazing to see a sea turtle nest and then for the nest to hatch and the babies to go back. It's a very critical, very sensitive, and you have this 6-foot mother and this little kutti, 4-inch baby, hundreds of them that dig themselves out of this nest, and then they have a very small window to go back to the ocean. If they don't go back, they'll get picked up by birds, other creatures, they might get lost. There's a possibility of too much heat. So it's very, very nuanced, it's very vulnerable, it's very delicate. And the giant leatherback in particular has been on the planet since the time of the dinosaurs. It is one of the most, the biggest traveler from what we know. It is also the most deep diving. Also, I think the most northern, towards the most colder waters, you find the giant leatherback. And the Andaman and Nicobar Islands have beaches which are the most important nesting sites of the giant leatherback in the entire northern Indian Ocean. So it's a very important habitat. So I'm on that ecological axis still. I'm trying to tell you the story of the wildlife and life, as it were, in these islands. This, of course, is a green sea turtle, and these are tracks as they leave behind on another small island sanctuary known as South Sentinel. Small again, 1.5 square kilometer island, uninhabited, which has a beautiful beach, uh, and the totals. Of course, uh, very, very rich marine life that has not been studied. The Andaman and Nicobar Islands are very close to the coral triangle, which is we know is the epicenter of coral diversity. And the limited studies that have happened have shown very high diversity and richness in terms of the coral species and the coral life in these islands, underwater life, which we know very little about. So I'm just trying to show to you how rich that place is. And by extension, any ecosystem that we study, it has its own characteristics, its own uniqueness. The deserts of Rajasthan and Gujarat have a bird known as the great Indian bustard, as you would know, which is 150 individuals left on this planet. It's much, much rarer than other creatures that get a lot more importance. So each ecosystem, each biogeographical zone, each socio-political, ecological system has its own uniqueness. And I'm just telling you the story through the Andaman and Nicobar. So I will come very briefly from the ecological to the socio-cultural, and then I'll go to the geological. So this is a representative of that very, very unique socio-ecological, cultural context of these particular islands. So now while we have 400,000, 500,000 people in these islands, the traditional communities like Biju mentioned in the beginning have been these tribal communities that are very, very small numbers. They have been here for at least 30, 40,000 years from what studies based on genetic analysis of genetic material seem to suggest. Archaeological and digs and all have said about 2,000 years, but science has taken it back and we say they might have been here for 40,000 years. They're quite a mystery. We don't know how they came there, how they've lived, how they survived. Very unique cultures, if I may say that way, but they very deeply, deeply threatened. So of the 6 big broad communities, there's only one broadly known as the Nicobaris that are about 25, 30,000 people. The others are all in a few hundreds. So the Jarawa may be about 400 people. There's a community known as the Onge, which is only 100 people. The Shompen, who are in Great Nicobar Island, are only 250 people. And there's a community known as the Great Andamanese, which is only about 50 people. So, 150 years ago, roughly in the middle of the 19th century, about 1850s, when the British conducted a count of the Great Andamanese, they were counted to be at least 5,000 people. Today, they are only 50. So, an entire community, a human community like us, with a culture, with its own lifestyle, has been pretty much wiped out. So, a combination of disease, a combination of taking over of land, a combination of destroying your culture, it's kind of just collapsing. So the Jarawa is one community. This is a picture. When I first went to the island 30 years ago, you would not see a Jarawa like this. They were still people of the forest. And I don't want to romanticize this beyond a point, but they lived on their own. They didn't wear clothes. They would shoot with bows and arrows. They were an extremely aggressive community in that sense. But things are changing very, very rapidly. And we don't have time to go into that story, but just to say that a community that has been there for 30, 40,000 years, maybe they won't exist in 30 years from now. So entire communities that are viable human communities are getting wiped out. And in other parts of the island, this is in the Andaman, in the Nicobar, which I will talk to you a little later, we are today bringing in such huge developmental projects, such huge infrastructure projects, that the communities over there, a community known as the Shompen, just 250 members, will be completely wiped out if the project comes up. So historically, this has happened, and we don't seem to have learned the lessons. On the one hand, we say, we are a very diverse culture and we are a very tolerant society. But it seems actually that's not really true, because we have not fully acknowledged the fact that there are communities that will get kind of wiped out. I won't go into that story, but also to argue and to show that it's very important of the survival of these communities and biodiversity. Now, this is a very interesting map as part of a study we did for UNESCO many years ago. This is a landscape, a political boundary known as the Jarawa Tribal Reserve. And I was telling Biju when we were coming here, it's 1,000 square kilometers of the most pristine forest in the Andaman Islands. Contiguous, undisturbed forest which have never been logged, for example. No outside intervention except for the life of the Jarawa. So there are It is the most important repository of the original forests of the Andaman Islands. And if you look at the legend, the dark green are the Andaman evergreen forests, and the two yellows are agriculture and moist deciduous forests. So the conversion of the forest for logging, for plantation has changed the nature of the forest. It is not like it used to be. But if the tribals don't survive, there will be an argument that we don't need these forests because the tribals are not there. So you can actually economically exploit these tropical evergreen forests that have not even been surveyed fully in the Andamans and in the Nicobar. So it's a very important kind of story of how tribal rights and biodiversity conservation actually overlap, and the two are dependent on each other. Now the Jarawas did not save the forest because of biodiversity, or we think it is important, but just by they live their way they live, and they did not allow us to enter their forests. So just by keeping us out, they managed to protect the forest. So this is a very important thing to keep in mind, that the forest will not survive if the tribal communities are not there in these islands. I come now to what I was saying in the beginning, the geological, and a very interesting geological dimension. Now for a moment, if you just look at my left hand here, Andamans in the north, Nicobar with Great Indira Point, the Indira Point and Great Nicobar in the south, and Port Blair roughly in the middle, yeah, as a pivot. When the earthquake of December 2004 happened, even before the waves of tsunami came, in our parks, in our cities, we have the seesaw. One side goes up and one side comes down. So the Andaman and Nicobar Islands tilted like a seesaw would do. So the Andaman Islands, the northern part of the Andaman Islands came up by 4 feet. And the Nicobar Islands and Great Nicobar saw permanent subsidence of 15 feet. 15 feet of permanent subsidence. And you see the map on the left, you see +1 on the top right, that is an island called Interview, that saw uplift of 1 meter. And extreme south, Indira Point, is minus 4.25 meters. That's roughly 15 feet of permanent subsidence. So if we were standing on the roof of this room in the morning of 26 December 2004 and the earthquake happened, suddenly we would find ourselves standing surrounded by waters of the Andaman Sea, because it would just sink. And the images on the right hand side are also very interesting images. These are NRSA images. There's an island called Kachal in the middle Nicobars. You can see the yellow circle on the left, and you see on top it says 21st of December 2004. This is 26 December 2004. So this is 4 days before the earthquake, tsunami. This is the evening of the tsunami, 26th of December 2004. And you will see the red, which is in the yellow circle, is land above the waterline. That entire land is now underwater. This place also saw about 5 meters of permanent subsidence. So this is the geological reality of the place. Now, can you or should you or will you not factor this reality when you do any intervention in this place? Because this island chain experiences 1 earthquake a week on an average. It is just like why the Himalayas are vulnerable in the way that they are, why rivers flow in the way that they do. That is part, to use a scientific analogy, that's part of the DNA of these systems. They are what they are, and we have to be cognizant and aware of what it means when we start to intervene, and that's very important to keep in mind. So this is an example in the Nicobars, Great Nicobar Island. You can see this is a very old picture now. This is a 2006 picture when I went there last. So you will see from a mountain in the biosphere reserve, you will see the coastline, and why the water has come in is because the land subsided, and the water has not gone back because the land is now lower land than the ocean. So you see the fields, paddy fields are submerged. You see an entire line of forest. There is a supari, there is areca plantation, there is coconut plantation, there is some casuarina, there is mangrove, now permanently submerged and getting brown and dying. So that landscape is changing very drastically. This is on the other side. This is on the northern side of the Andaman Islands, and this is almost a 160 or 170-degree picture of the coastline, and you will see an entire coral reef. This is vision of what I can see before my eyes. A coral reef that we know has to be permanently underwater all the time has been permanently uplifted. This is Poraitis, this rock coral. You can see entire colonies of this are permanently above the high tide line. So this is the evidence of the change that has taken place, substantial change that has taken place in this ecosystem. So, and this is the bottom one is a close-up picture. This is off the west coast of this island of Interview, where I had a chance of being on a survey in February, just 2 months after the earthquake have happened. But just look at the change that has happened. So on the one side, you can say land was created. On the other side, land lost because it was submerged. But this is not a zero-sum game. It's like ecosystems would change, and what was beach earlier would be uplifted or submerged. We'll have a new coastline. The mangrove would move, some would die. It's a very dynamic system, and this is constantly at play in that particular island group. There's also a very interesting graphic. It may not be very visible at the back, but there's a big yellow star, which is the epicenter of the earthquake of December 2004. And you can see the plates, the geological plate. There is the Sunda plate, there is the Australia plate, there is the India plate, and there's something called the Burma microplate, which is embedded between all this geological configuration. And the islands are located on that Burma microplate. But you don't see the islands in this map because of the yellow dots. And the yellow dots are earthquakes in the Andaman and Nicobar waters in 4 years after 2004. So it's constantly you are having earthquakes. So the point I'm just trying to drive home and make you notice is, if there are so many earthquakes, what is the kind of development you should do over there? I mean, of course, there's the biological diversity, there is the human rights dimension, etc., etc. And why that happens, another geological reality of the planet is that we are located on the ring of fire. So around the Pacific, there is this ring known as the ring of fire, where all the earthquakes happen, most of the earthquakes happen, the volcanoes exist over there, tsunamis originate. So Japan, the east coast of the Americas, it's all where the most tectonically active zone is. You would also know that the islands have an active volcano in Barren Island. So it's very, very tectonic. That's the point I want to make. So this reality of the place is not very fully understood and is not being accounted for when we are making interventions historically. But even now, where 20 years ago we have had this earthquake, should we not know better? Should we not make more sensible decisions is the concern that I want to highlight before you. I'm just going to take a short jump into a completely different territory to give you an idea of how development happens. And I think it's very important because we have to understand the historical trajectory of development in many places, including areas we inhabit. And this is, as you will see, is actually 94 is the date it came to the library, but this is a 1964 document by a high-powered team from Delhi, which was an departmental team for the accelerated development of Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So we're 65, so about 70 years or 60 years back. And when I first saw this report, when I first went to the islands, it's a short 100-page little report. There were so many aspects of it that I didn't understand, that I felt very angry about. And I'll give you some examples of what I mean. It's important to understand the historical context of all of this. Because if you don't understand what was done 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago, the picture that we have of today is very different. The moment we understand what happened and why things were done, our understanding of the current moment also changes very significantly. So there are 2 or 3 things I want to show in this document. One of the things that angered me the most was to see a chapter called colonization. So you were a colony of the British in 1947. Less than 20 years later, in a Government of India document that is published by experts from Delhi, you have a chapter called colonization. And I still remember, I was so angry as a just passed out of college guy that time. What are we doing? I mean, why didn't we realize that are we going to do the same thing that the British did to us, for instance? Or we will say that, oh no, colonization here means different. Because we'll say, oh, we all live in colonies, so we are that kind of thing. But language is not neutral. Language is very deeply embedded with meaning and value and what we believe. And if you look at the details of this thing, it was actually looked at as an empty space to be able to colonize for people, for economic activity, etc., etc. And look at this same document. So the Jarawa is a human tribal community that has been living there for 40,000 years. They have special provisions in the Indian Constitution. 1,000 square kilometers of that land is Jarawa Tribal Reserve. It is their home. And this document talks of this forest as Jarawa infested. What is an infestation? Disease, pest, virus is what we call infestation. Language performs. So you use particular words and languages, it will evoke a different response in you. So you say, this is a pest, this is an infestation, your reaction is it should be removed, it should be destroyed. If you just change the word, we say Jarawa inhabited, our response to that reality changes. We say, okay, they live over there. They are not infesting that place. And if we change it one more degree and say, Jarawa owned place. Oh, it is their ownership, it is their property. Then you cannot say that you put a gun to them and kill them or you take away their land, because if you are a pest and if you are an infestation, then it becomes very easy to do. And if you look at the history of these islands, whether through this or otherwise, there has been this idea that these are people that, why do they need so much land and 1,000 square kilometers of forest? We can put it to more productive use. And so many things have happened in the last 50, 60 years that have actually can be argued to be based on a thinking of this kind, a value system that has no value for them, does not see them as rightful owners of that landscape, because they live naked in forests. They are these junglis. They don't live the lives that we do. They cook food. They eat food as raw, roasted or boiled. Their culture is not an evolved culture. So it becomes a way to almost colonize them. And a lot of people have said that there's a second colonization that kind of happens. And so there are many examples of this. For example, in Little Andaman, a completely pristine island at that point of time, 760 square kilometers of untouched tropical evergreen forest. The same proposal, this quadrilateral at the bottom, some 10,000 acres. So the proposal is clear fell that 10,000 acres and we'll do plantation and stuff like that. So it's almost like empty space. And even if the entire plan is not implemented, one can see that even a part of it starts to have an impact. And you will see, this is a picture in 1998. This is from Little Andaman, this picture from the map that I showed you. And just look at the size of the tree. This is a massive, massive elephant. The diameter of this tree was about the height of this room. I had to look up like this. So can you imagine what the scale of the tree would have been? Imagine a tree with a diameter that is 15 feet. I can't even imagine what it, and then imagine what the forest would be that has a tree like this. But then when all of it is of no value, and this is also home of the Onge tribal community. This was one of their best hunting grounds, this place where this tree is now seen. So you get into a circle of development that only has value for certain things and loses value for other things. This is a classical example, and Biju was telling me while we were coming, of building seawalls. So you've destroyed the mangroves, you can see, you have mined away the sand, the sea is of course going to erode, is going to encroach. You have productive assets on the other side. So you build a wall that is the worst kind of protection from the sea, which is also built by sand that is mined from another beach. So you get into a vicious cycle that actually leads us nowhere. But all of this emanates from a kind of thinking of this is development, this is important, which we have to question, because it's all coming up upon us now with climate change, with the impacts that we are seeing around us, both in terms of the specifics of what's happening in the Himalayas or in a Wayanad, but also with changing climate, the impact on fisheries, the impact on livelihoods, the impact on agriculture, etc. But and the other interesting thing is, what have we changed in our thinking? And I think I've given away the answer. From being Jarawa infested in the 60s, we have only become priced piece of mid-ocean real estate in today's world. And we know what happens to land when it becomes real estate. It becomes empty of any other value. But land is not empty, no? For people who live on the land, whether it's a farmer or whether it's even the fisher folk, or even for them, everything is in that land. Their history, their forefathers, their meaning. This is not empty space. There is a concept of terra nullius. This is not empty. There is something there. It's almost like looking at the world. If the world was to be looked at from the eyes of the turtle, then we say, oh, far away Andaman Islands. But no, it's far away for you. For the turtle and the tribal, it is there. You are far away. So the lens that you look at things from, the point of view that you have, then becomes very, very important. So how can I say my land is real estate, take it away? What happens to my history, my ownership? My forefathers were buried there. I have religious rights over there. But when we start to look at these landscapes, these adjuncts, these peripheries as just something that will contribute to the larger Indian superpower kind of dynamics, then all these places lose value, they lose meaning. We can't allow them to have meaning. That's the way we appropriate them. Then we will put our naval bases there, we will put our infrastructure. But what is over there then gets completely lost. The giant leatherback turtle can't nest anywhere, it can only nest there. It has been on this planet much before the human being came. So we have to account for some of all that. And if you make it a price piece of mid-ocean real estate, then there is really no hope. And we have to tell these other stories. That real estate might be one story, but there are other stories of people and places and creatures that have been there and have much more of a right, actually, not even an equal right. And maybe we won't succeed in that storytelling, but at least the story has to be told, because there can be that impact, and it's not that we did not know when we made those decisions. And it's tragic because so imagine this: in 2009, in a defense seminar in Port Blair, just 5 years after the biggest earthquake and tsunami in human history, in a landscape that saw 4 feet of uplift and 15 feet of submergence, the former President Kalam, the late President Kalam, in a defense seminar in Port Blair said, in his vision for the islands, he said, I want a 250 megawatt nuclear power station over here. What sense does it make? You don't even need that much electricity in those islands. So what I'm trying to also point to, and because I am in a technology institution, the idea of the technocratic state, the idea of technology, the idea of this vision of technology as a vehicle to what? This being this superpower, being this very powerful entity. So these are all steps in that direction. And there is, if any of you are interested, there is a lot of very interesting work in the sociology and philosophy of technology that raises these questions. Because what is the justification? It's almost like we will do it because we can do it. It has no consequence. It has no use, because you can't even evacuate that power. Where will that power go? And imagine a nuclear power station. If you have another earthquake, which you are having every week, you have another tsunami, you are creating such a large disaster. For what? So this larger, deeper thing that all of us have bought into, I think, needs to be very deeply questioned. That we are a great country, that we want to be a superpower, we want to be a technological superpower, we want to be a cultural superpower. This superpowerness for what? Is something that is a deep question to ask, because it will come at a very large price. It won't have a place for the turtle and for cultures and for societies. And this is a very clear manifestation in the islands. And like I said at the beginning, can it work in the Western Ghats, this idea, this thinking, this socio-cultural, ecological, and the triangle of these geological, socio-cultural, ecological. And I'll come to the last part of my presentation, is this kind of huge kind of demon that's standing in front of us today, even as I speak. This $10 billion project, 80,000 crores of investment in Great Nicobar Island. We did this book called The Great Nicobar Betrayal. Again, we brought copies. Do please pick up. It's a documentation of what's happening. $10 billion is like, I don't know what the port that's come up in Trivandrum, what is the cost of that one? And how many times more is that investment proposed? So in one island of 900 square kilometers, you can see there's a 4-component thing that is there. There is a massive port of 40,000 crores in a place known as Galathea Bay, where I showed you the turtle picture of the giant leatherback, the hatchling, the tracks, and the mother turtle. There is a power plant, there is an airport, and there is a 130 square kilometer township in a pristine evergreen forest, where even by government records, by government statement, 1 million trees will be cut. 1 million trees will be cut. And other scientists who have done some analysis say it could be 3 million trees or even 10 million trees. And imagine today, in the era of climate change, when almost every day we are seeing the impacts, you are going ahead and arguing for a project that will upfront, we begin by saying we will cut 1 million trees. There are some aspects of the project. This is the Bay of Galathea. This is, you can see, on the top is this river Galathea, which is the largest river in the islands, comes and enters into the ocean. There's a beautiful bay on that where the river enters the sea, and this is the site of that 40,000 crore transshipment port. Little bit like what we have been doing, similar kind of idea. Now this in 1997 was declared as a wildlife sanctuary because this beach, the strip of red that you see, is a 2 kilometer beach, which is one of the most important nesting sites of the giant leatherback. So 4 species of sea turtles nest here. On an average, they are recording 500 nestings of the leatherback on this beach. So this beach and about 12 kilometers of this entire bay, the waters, there are coral colonies here. Beyond this forest are the Nicobar megapods nesting. The river has crocodiles. There are Nicobari tree shoes. So it's a very, very rich landscape, like the entire island is. But this 13 square kilometer bay was declared a turtle sanctuary in 1997. Now it is in this very sanctuary that the port has to be built. The opening of the mouth of the bay is about 3 kilometers wide today. Now imagine you're a sea turtle, you're a giant leatherback female who's going to nest. So you have about 3 kilometers to enter the bay and find your nesting site. Now when the port will come up, and this is an earlier design of the port, you can see the berths, and to ensure stable shipping, you will need to build breakwaters. So you see the breakwaters here, and the breakwaters will reduce the opening of the mouth by 90%. So a 3 kilometer wide opening will now be only 300 meters. And even our leading scientific institutions, including the Wildlife Institute of India, is on record in a meeting of the National Board for Wildlife to give permission for the construction of this port and for the denotification of the sanctuary, because otherwise the port cannot be built here. 15 days in January of 2021, the Ministry of Environment and Forest released a National Marine Turtle Action Plan, in which Galathea Bay, this bay, is listed as one of the most important marine nesting sites in the country. But just 15 days before that, the same ministry has denotified this sanctuary and has allowed for the port to come up over here. And among the sites in the Andaman and Nicobar, this is among the most important nesting sites even with the Andaman and Nicobar. So we are actually going to be sacrificing one of the most prestigious, the most precious, the most important natural, I know what word to use, natural heritage of this country, of this world, is going to be sacrificed for this port. And it's absolutely amazing when you look at the giant leatherback story, because there is some evidence from satellite studies that giant leatherbacks that nest in the Andaman and Nicobar waters, including in Galathea Bay, after nesting, swim 12,000 kilometers to the coast of Africa on one side and about 10,000 kilometers to the coast of Australia on the other side. So look at the journeys that these creatures are undertaking, and journeys that they have been doing probably for millennia. So these are the creatures that are connecting the planet. It's not us. They have long, deep, old connections that are there. And you destroy the nesting habitat, we don't know what the repercussions of that will be. So there is this huge port project that's coming up. We are deeply concerned. We've been raising a lot of concerns. We've been writing about it. The very recent issue of Frontline magazine, if any of you read the one just before the latest one, is a special cover issue on this on the Great Nicobar. Please do pick up a copy if it's still available. A lot of material is available online on the environmental aspect, on the ecological aspect, on tribal rights. This huge project coming up, which is completely ignorant of this tri-axis that I'm talking about. It is not aware of the geological reality because it's building a port in the most seismically active zone on the planet. It is not aware of the ecological reality because we have creatures here that have not been studied. We don't know about them. And then there are others which are extremely rare, unique, endemic. And we are forgetting and completely ignoring the fact that this is home to tribal communities who have no idea of what will happen to them when the project comes up. And then there is the geological reality. And you can see this picture on the top is the current picture of the lighthouse of Indira Point. You may have seen this picture, it's quite a common one now. You might have ever imagined, you might have thought, how come a lighthouse is standing in water? The lighthouse is standing in water because it was not constructed there. The original lighthouse was the same one in the bottom picture. This was about 50-60 meters above the high tide line. It is standing in water now because the land of Great Nicobar sank, what I mentioned to you. 15 feet of submergence saw this change, which is why the lighthouse stands there. And it is in this landscape, just north, this bay over here that you can see, this is the bay, this is Galathea, where this project is coming up. So in a landscape that saw 15 feet of submergence, imagine putting an investment of 80,000 crores, 40,000 in a port. What happens if there's an earthquake tomorrow and the land lifts or subsides? Your entire investment is gone. You look at the bottom quote, just to give you what here is, this is a study from IIT Kanpur, which says the lighthouse at Indira Point, the southernmost tip of Great Nicobar, which was on high ground before the earthquake, is now underwater, indicating a land subsidence of 3 to 4 meters. But there is a 2019 report of another Government of India body which is justifying the port, and this is what they say. That report by an organization called WAPCOS says the topography of the island is best suited for a port which was not even damaged by the tsunami of 2004. Is this not a, what more damage can we want? What else can be damaged? They even got the date wrong. They got 26th of November. So, the shoddiness and the lack of scientific rigor and integrity in the way that this whole project has been gone about, in the way that we look at these systems, in the way that we ignore the ecological, geological and socio-cultural realities, we are all going to pay the price for that, today or tomorrow. Certainly the local systems will, but in the larger context, we don't know what the impact of this will be, say, on mainland India, on the coasts over here. So it's of deep concern that all of us have. So I was thinking I'll go down this route of the sociology, philosophy of technology, but I won't. There's a very interesting work, something called the Polytechnic Monotechnic by a guy called Lewis Mumford, an American philosopher of the early 20th century. And more recently, there is Sheila Jasanoff, also at Harvard, at Cornell, who has some very interesting articulation of technologies of hubris and technologies of humility. So these are ways of looking at technology. To think of how come a technologist says that, oh, we will have a 250 megawatt nuclear power station in a seismically prone, very, very sensitive zone. How do you understand that thinking? What is that thinking all about? But since we don't have time for that, we will not go there. So I'm wrapping up the Great Nicobar project. We've been, what I just very briefly mentioned to you, we have been documenting very extensively. We have put together a timeline which has all the information of this project, if any one of you are interested. So this QR code takes you to a PDF in which, I'll just wait for a minute if anybody wants to take a picture and just for your records. And it's a 25 or 28 page document where every single date in the history of the project is marked out. And if you click that, you are hyperlinked into a Google Drive that gives you access to the full document. So if any of you are interested, and this is an invitation, because a lot of work needs to be done, I've not had time to share some of the details of what ecologically this project threatens, but also how bad the EIA report, how shoddy work was involved, how mindless the environmental clearance conditions are, etc., etc. So there is a proposal to 10,000 coral colonies to be uprooted and to be translocated and fixed somewhere else. 10,000 coral colonies in that place. So it will be very valuable if you looked at some of these documents as students, as researchers, as journalists, as lawyers, anybody, to look at certain aspects and perhaps work on it. It makes for some very interesting possibilities of environmental governance, environmental law, research. If you did as a collective, a study of the marine component of the EIA report, it might be very, very interesting to see what are the gaps, what has been deliberately missed out. So many species that are found in those waters are not even mentioned in the EIA report, for instance. So this is the document, this is the timeline. So like March 2021, the first one on the top, is when the project proposal was first made. So if you click this link, it will take you to the original proposal document, for example. And then over time, we will see the meetings of the ministry, the agenda minutes, then the EIA report, the public hearing documents, scientific documents. So roughly 300, 350 documents, thousands of pages are available over here if any of you are interested. And it would make for some very interesting work, I do believe, because we are working on it, but we do also need people to look at other aspects of the project in many ways. It's constantly kind of growing, and it's nothing is bigger on the ground, but that is that concern. And for me, and I'm really finishing here, is that it's the manifestation of this ignorance of this tri-axis that I'm talking about. We are not accounting for the geological reality. We are not accounting for the ecological richness and the wealth of this place. We have completely forgotten the tribal people over here. So what is this for then? Not only are we damaging everything, but we're also damaging ourselves. And which is why this framework has been very useful for me, and maybe you might want to consider looking at it in the areas that you kind of work with. This is another book I did. This is an updated version of Islands in Flux. We published an updated version. This is 30 years of my journalism on various aspects of these islands, some of which I have spoken to you today. And again, we have copies outside. It will give you um, parts and stories of the islands that we never know about. What I began by saying. There's so much happening. I've not spoken about the different human cultures. So many people, like Biju mentioned, went there as convicts in cellular jail. But there were so many people who went there not as convicts, but for other reasons. They were living there, their different communities, their cultures. There's a whole bunch of people from the Malabar. Uh, they were taken there after the Mapla rebellion. There are people who came from Burma. There's a very interesting community from Burma that came. There's a very interesting community that came from Jharkhand and those parts of the country as forest labor. There were a whole bunch of Tamils that went. Bengalis came from what was East Pakistan and now Bangladesh in the 60s. So it's a very interesting mix of cultures. So it's a very interesting place. And when you start to look at the details, it becomes more and more fascinating. And some of those stories historically are there. And then, of course, there's the Great Nicobar Betrayal, which is a short collection of articles and details on just this project that I've spoken to you about in a little bit of detail. This finally is a collection of my books on the islands. There is, of course, Islands in Flux and Great Nicobar Betrayal, but I also did the novel I mentioned, and you can see the flower on the cover, the orchid. And there's a book for children I did on turtles. It's the story of a little boy who goes out with his scientist mother to look for turtles, for the green sea turtle for the first time in one of the islands in the Andaman. Uh, and the one on the left, we don't have copies today, but this is the UNESCO report I mentioned. It's available online. So if any of you are interested, you can access it as an online PDF. We brought copies of all of these if you should be interested. And I think that's it. Thank you very much. This is my email ID. Please do feel free to reach out for more information, to have a discussion. If you want to do any work on any aspect, I'd be happy. We can have a conversation with Biju. If you are interested in your own capacity, whatever, I'd be very happy to hear from you. So thank you very much again for this invitation and for your patient listening.